In July 1981, a 24-year-old woman went missing in Birmingham, England. With limited forensic tools at the time, the case went cold until a breakthrough came decades later. Nova Welsh was born in Jamaica in 1957. When Nova turned 10, her mother, Lorna, made the difficult decision to move to the United Kingdom with her 2 daughters. Lorna wanted to give her girls a better life and more opportunities, even though it meant leaving behind the familiarity and comfort of their home in Jamaica. At the age of 16, Nova met Osmond Bell, a young man who quickly captured her heart. Their connection was immediate, and despite their youth, they decided to take their relationship seriously. They made the bold choice to live together. Their love seemed strong in the beginning, and 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, Jonathan. 4 years after Jonathan's birth, they had another son, whom they named Lee. The family appeared happy to the outside world, and Nova took great pride in being a mother. However, beneath the surface, their relationship began to deteriorate. The affection and connection they once shared slowly faded away, replaced by tension and resentment. Arguments became more frequent, and soon, domestic violence entered their home. Osmond reportedly began physically abusing Nova, controlling her movements, and threatening her life if she ever tried to leave. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly volatile, leaving Nova emotionally drained and fearful for her safety. Unable to carry the burden alone, Nova confided in her younger sister, sharing the pain and fear she endured. She expressed how unhappy she had become and how much she longed for peace. Eventually, Nova decided she could no longer live under such circumstances. She ended her relationship with Osmond, determined to find happiness again. After some time, Nova met a man named Wayne Newby. Hoping to start fresh, she allowed herself to fall in love again. Wayne began visiting her home, and their relationship blossomed into something that gave her hope. But this new chapter in her life angered Osmond deeply. His jealousy and violent behavior worsened, and Nova found herself once again surrounded by danger, unaware that an even darker fate awaited her. On July 27, 1981, Nova failed to show up for work. Days went by, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Her disappearance was sudden and without explanation. It was Nova's best friend who first noticed something was wrong. She called Nova several times, hoping to hear her familiar voice, but every call went unanswered. Growing uneasy, she decided to go to Nova's apartment to check on her personally. When she arrived at the apartment, she found the door locked. She knocked several times, calling out Nova's name, but there was no response. The silence inside was unsettling. At first, she thought perhaps Nova had traveled abroad without telling anyone, but something did not add up. Hanging on the clothesline outside were freshly washed clothes, an odd detail that made her realize something was terribly wrong. On August 9th, unable to shake her worry, she went to the police station and officially reported Nova missing. 2 weeks after Nova's disappearance, the police began a formal search. They reached out to Osmond Bell, hoping he could provide information about her whereabouts. Osmond claimed that he had not seen Nova in days and suggested that she might have left for America with her new boyfriend, Wayne. Meanwhile, Nova's 2 sons were staying with him, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. Then, 3 days after the missing person report was filed, a strange letter surfaced. It was handed to Nova's best friend, who quickly turned it over to the police. The handwriting appeared to belong to a woman, but the identity of the writer was unknown. On August 18th, a neighbor called the police to report a strong foul odor that had begun spreading through the area. The smell seemed to be coming from Nova's apartment upstairs. Responding officers broke the lock and entered the home to investigate. The stench was overpowering, leading them to a cupboard located under the stairs. The door to the cupboard was locked, but the lock appeared to have been tampered with. A piece of chewing gum was oddly used to keep it sealed. When the officers finally opened the cupboard, they were met with a horrifying sight. Inside was the decomposing body of a woman wrapped in a blanket. The body was soon identified as belonging to Nova. She was wearing a nightgown, and despite the state of decay, her features were still recognizable. The scene was heartbreaking and disturbing, The police immediately called for an ambulance, and Nova's body was taken for an autopsy. According to the post-mortem report, she had lost her life due to pressure applied to her neck, indicating that she had been strangled. The piece of chewing gum from the cupboard lock was carefully collected as evidence. While the world searched for Nova, she had been lying lifeless inside her own home. Osmond emerged as the prime suspect. He was arrested and held in custody for 4 days, during which he was questioned repeatedly about Nova's demise. Osmond maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with it. With no solid evidence linking him directly to the case, the police were forced to release him. The investigation continued for some time, but with no new leads or breakthroughs, the case eventually went cold. In 2016, cold case investigators began reviewing older unsolved cases, hoping that advancements in forensic science might finally bring long-awaited answers. Among these cases was the tragic case of Nova, whose end had remained a haunting mystery for more than 3 decades. By this time, genetic testing had advanced significantly since the 1980s, offering new possibilities for uncovering evidence that had once seemed useless. The investigators revisited the materials collected from the original crime scene, determined to find something that could point to the perpetrator. During their review, the investigators made a crucial discovery. DNA testing on the piece of chewing gum used to seal the cupboard door where Nova's body was found revealed a match to Osmond Bell. The same DNA profile was also identified on the anonymous letter that had been sent to Nova's best friend, an attempt to shift suspicion toward Wayne, the man Nova had recently begun dating. The DNA evidence was described as having a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance of belonging to anyone else, leaving no doubt about the connection. Following the discovery, Bell was arrested in 2016 and charged in connection with Nova's demise. After years of waiting, the case finally went to trial at Birmingham Crown Court in 2017. The court heard that Bell had ended Nova's life in a fit of rage after learning about her new relationship. The prosecutors explained that in the aftermath of the crime, he had tried to mislead the investigators by sending a forged letter, pretending to be someone else, and suggesting that Wayne was responsible. The details painted a picture of a jealous and violent man desperate to conceal his guilt. Testimony during the trial revealed that Nova and Bell had continued living together even after their separation, but their relationship had become deeply toxic. Witnesses recounted how Bell had repeatedly threatened to end Nova's life if she ever left him. This threat, once dismissed as an angry outburst, took on a chilling weight as the evidence unfolded. Despite the prosecution's efforts, the jury found Bell guilty of manslaughter, concluding that he had not planned the crime but acted in anger. In March 2017, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. After 36 long years, justice had finally been served. Nova's mother, Lorna, expressed a deep sense of relief and sorrow as she gave her statement to the press. She said, "Finally, after 36 long years, Nova can rest in peace. The family can now have closure knowing the person who took Nova's life has been brought to justice. I would sincerely like to thank everyone involved in bringing this case to court." A police officer who had worked on the case also reflected on its significance. He stated, "With the advances in technology assisting our old investigations, we can bring people to justice no matter how long after the offense has happened." In August 1660, a 70-year-old man set out on a short walk in Campden, England, and never returned. With no body and mounting suspicion, the disappearance spiraled into one of the most shocking criminal cases of the 17th century. William Harrison was born around the year 1590. As an adult, William entered into service under Lady Campden, where he worked as a steward and estate manager. This position placed him in charge of overseeing the smooth running of her lands and financial affairs, a role that demanded both precision and honesty. Within the community, William was known as a man of strong moral standing. His work often required him to travel, collect rents, and mediate disputes between tenants, tasks that could easily lead to mistrust or resentment if handled poorly. By the year 1660, William was nearing 70 years old, an age when most would have retired from demanding responsibilities. Nevertheless, he continued to fulfill his role with the same diligence he had shown throughout his life. He lived in Campden with his wife and son, surrounded by the quiet rhythms of village life. On August 16, 1660, William set out on foot to collect rents in the nearby village of Charingworth, a journey of about 2 miles from his home. It was a routine task, one he had undertaken many times before without incident. However, that evening, William failed to return home. His wife, increasingly anxious as darkness fell, sent the family servant, John Perry, to look for him along the familiar path. When John did not return by the following morning, William's son Edward joined the search, determined to uncover what had happened to his father. Their search led to a disturbing discovery. Along the route to Charingworth, they found a hat, a shirt, and a neckband belonging to William. The garments were stained with blood, and the hat appeared to have been slashed with a sharp instrument. To those who knew William's habits and cautious nature, it seemed clear that something terrible had occurred. With no sign of his body and only these bloodied remnants, the community feared the worst. Rumors spread quickly through Campden that William's life was ended during his journey. Suspicion soon turned toward John Perry, the servant who had been sent to find his master. Under questioning, John offered a shocking confession. He claimed that he, his mother Joan Perry, and his brother Richard had conspired to rob and slain William. According to his account, they had strangled the elderly steward and dumped his body in a mill pond to conceal their crime. Despite the absence of a body, the confession seemed convincing enough to the local authorities, and all 3 members of the Perry family were arrested and charged. The first trial took place in 1661. During the proceedings, inconsistencies emerged in John's statements, including a false story he had told weeks earlier about being attacked by robbers. His testimony implicated his mother and brother, leading to their conviction for robbery, though no conclusive evidence of slaying was presented. It is believed that Joan and Richard pleaded guilty to robbery in hopes of benefiting from the Indemnity and Oblivion Act of 1660, which pardoned certain first-time offenders. Still, questions about the missing body and the truth of John's account lingered. A second trial was convened later that spring, this time charging the Perrys with taking the life of William. By then, John had recanted his earlier confession, claiming that his words were the product of confusion or insanity. Nevertheless, the jury remained unconvinced. Despite the absence of physical proof and John's reversal, all 3 were found guilty and received capital punishment. The verdict was met with both disbelief and grim acceptance among the townspeople. The executions were carried out on Broadway Hill in Gloucestershire. Joan Perry was hanged first, reportedly in an attempt to break any supposed witchcraft spell she might have cast over her sons. Her execution was followed by that of Richard and John, who both maintained their innocence until the end. 2 years after his mysterious disappearance, in 1662, William astonished everyone by returning to England alive. He was older, frail, and marked by the hardships he had endured, yet unmistakably the same William who had vanished on his journey to Charingworth. According to William's own account, he had been kidnapped on the night of his disappearance by 3 horsemen. They had seized him on the road and carried him off against his will, taking him first to the coastal town of Deal. There he claimed he was sold to a ship's captain and transported overseas. His story grew even more extraordinary as he described being sold into slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Forced into servitude, he lived under harsh conditions until the demise of his master provided him with a chance to escape. After his escape, William said he made his way to a seaport, where he managed to stow away on a Portuguese vessel. The ship carried him to Lisbon, where he found temporary refuge before finally securing passage back to England. His return journey was long and dangerous, and it was only after many months that he was able to reach his homeland once more. When he arrived, he was welcomed by astonished neighbors and a deeply shaken family who had mourned him. The revelation that William was alive cast a grim light on the events that had followed his disappearance. The executions of Joan, John, and Richard Perry appeared to be an appalling miscarriage of justice. They had been tried, convicted, and hanged for a crime that had never occurred, their ends resting entirely on John's false confession. The case became one of the most disturbing examples of wrongful conviction in English legal history, raising troubling questions about the reliability of confessions made under pressure. In May 1987, in Hopkins, South Carolina, two hunters stumbled upon a horrifying scene of human remains. With limited forensic tools available at the time, the case quickly went cold, leaving her family without answers until decades later. Patricia Ann Green was born in 1953. She grew up to become a devoted mother who dedicated much of her time and energy to raising her three children. By 1987, Patricia was raising her family in Columbia, South Carolina. At that time, she lived with her three children and her sister in an apartment located on Rice Street, just off Pickens Street. On May 10, 1987, a shocking discovery was made just steps away from the entrance of McEntire Air Base in Hopkins, South Carolina. Two hunters, moving through the area, came across a disturbing sight. What they found would remain with them forever, and in their horror, they quickly contacted law enforcement to report what they had seen. When the police arrived at the scene, they confirmed the hunters' worst fears. The victim was a woman, already deceased. The officers carefully surveyed the area and determined that the woman had been shot multiple times before being left in a culvert. The investigators began piecing together what they could from the scene. They worked to understand how the victim ended up in such a remote and hidden location. While searching the immediate area, the officers noted a small but haunting detail. The woman's shoes were not on her feet. Instead, her untied shoes were found lying nearby on the bank of the ditch, separated from her body. One of the first challenges the authorities were facing was identifying the victim. No identification was recovered at the scene. With no personal belongings or immediate clues at the crime scene, the investigators decided to circulate details of the case locally in the hope that someone might recognize her. Eventually, family members came forward and confirmed the victim was Patricia Ann Green. Years passed without justice, but in the 2000s and 2010s, a new effort emerged. Richland County Sheriff Leon Lott established a cold case squad dedicated to revisiting unsolved cases. This specialized team began reviewing old cases with fresh eyes, determined to apply modern technology to evidence that had once yielded no results. Patricia's case was among those re-examined. The detectives returned to the evidence collected from the crime scene decades earlier. With advances in technology, samples were retested. The new analysis provided investigators with a crucial breakthrough. The DNA results pointed directly to Philip Johnson, a man already serving multiple life sentences in Sumter County. Johnson had been arrested in 1988 and was known for a string of violent crimes. In March 2017, when the investigators confronted him, he offered details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. According to his own account, Johnson admitted that Patricia's slaying was part of a spree. He told the investigators there was no specific motive, describing her as simply somebody that he shot and slain. The authorities believed that he ended two women's lives in Sumter County before he ended Patricia's life, and then went on to take the lives of two more women afterward. Johnson remains incarcerated at Kirkland Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. Reflecting on the case, law enforcement emphasized the importance of persistence. The authorities stated that this case serves as a reminder to victims' families that they are never forgotten. Cold case investigators pledged that no matter how much time passes, they will continue to review old files with the latest technology available. For Patricia's family, the wait for answers stretched nearly 30 years, but with the confession and DNA confirmation, they finally received the truth about what happened to her. In July 2011, a 16-year-old girl left her home in La Paz, Mendoza province in Argentina, but she never returned. What began as a missing person report quickly unraveled into a web of contradictions, silence, and overlooked evidence. Aldana Celeste Orozco Maturano was born in 1997 in La Paz. She grew up in modest circumstances, raised mainly by her mother and stepfather. By 2011, Aldana was in her second year of high school and had begun to develop her own opinions and dreams. Like many teenagers, she was curious about the world beyond her small town. She expressed a desire for independence and talked about finding a way to build a better future for herself and her family. Her teachers saw her as a thoughtful student who worked hard and rarely got into trouble. On July 8th, Aldana was last seen leaving her home, reportedly to visit a friend. It was a normal afternoon, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, Aldana never returned home. As hours turned into days, her family grew increasingly anxious, and what began as mild concern soon turned into panic. When all attempts to locate her failed, they decided to file a missing person report with the local authorities. The initial investigation offered little clarity. The statements given to the police were inconsistent and confusing. Aldana's stepfather told the officers that she had been acting rebellious and suggested that she might have left voluntarily. His account implied that she had run away in search of freedom or independence. But this explanation did not align with what others knew about her. Aldana's friends and classmates rejected the runaway theory. They insisted that she had no boyfriend, no savings, and no plans to leave home. She had shown no signs of distress and had even made plans for school activities later that week. To them, it was unthinkable that she would vanish without telling anyone. These contradictions deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance, but the investigators appeared reluctant to dig deeper. Within weeks, the case lost momentum. The police treated Aldana's disappearance as a runaway incident rather than a possible kidnapping, which limited the resources and urgency devoted to finding her. No search teams were organized, and no public alerts were issued. For the family, this lack of action was devastating, as every passing day made hope feel more distant. In the months that followed, the neighbors began recalling troubling details from before Aldana went missing. Several reported hearing loud arguments and shouting coming from her home in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Some witnesses also claimed that they had seen unknown men visiting the house at odd hours, raising suspicions about possible connections to trafficking or criminal activity. Despite these disturbing accounts, the authorities failed to follow up on key leads. Testimonies were overlooked, and evidence was never properly examined. As a result, Aldana's case gradually faded from public attention. What began as a missing person investigation soon turned into a cold case, leaving behind unanswered questions. Over the years, her face appeared on missing children campaigns and Interpol databases, keeping her name alive long after the local authorities had closed the file. Activists and independent organizations often cited her case as a symbol of the failures in Argentina's handling of missing person investigations, especially those involving minors from low-income families. For nearly a decade, her family lived between faint hope and painful uncertainty, never knowing whether Aldana was alive or deceased. In December 2020, the long-dormant case suddenly resurfaced when the National Gendarmerie conducted a raid on the home of Aldana's mother and stepfather. The operation led to both being arrested and detained on suspicion of involvement in human trafficking. The investigators alleged that Aldana's disappearance might have been connected to a broader criminal network that operated by recruiting or coercing minors through family members. Following the arrests, the federal court expanded its investigation into a suspected child trafficking network that allegedly involved the exchange or sale of minors. The authorities began uncovering evidence suggesting that vulnerable families had been targeted by traffickers who promised money, favors, or opportunities in return for handing over children. These revelations painted a grim picture of systemic exploitation that had remained hidden in plain sight for years. Then, in 2021, nearly 10 years after she first vanished, Aldana was found alive in Buenos Aires during a police operation against a human trafficking ring. Aldana had been forced into prostitution from a young age and lived under the constant control of her captors. Her years in captivity were marked by abuse, coercion, and the loss of freedom she had once dreamed of gaining. Her recovery brought renewed national attention and forced Argentina to confront deep-rooted issues within its justice system. Journalists, activists, and citizens began questioning how such a case could have gone unnoticed for so long and why early warnings had been dismissed. The public outcry demanded accountability for the neglect and corruption that had allowed Aldana's suffering to continue unchecked.